Good morning, everybody. This is Zach Said It Again. I'm your host, Zach Cooley, and I'm very honored to have on the phone with me for our Christmas podcast, Mr. Thom Moore. Thank you for being with me, Thom.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and Merry Christmas in advance.
Merry Christmas to you. I want to tell you that before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, you really are one of the main inspirations for my doing this podcast. You had me on.
It's my fault.
It is. It is. I'm giving you the blame anyway.
That's right. The blame's good.
You had me on your show talking with a couple of times, and I said, you know what? I do a lot of great interviews with a lot of inspiring people, and all people get is the encapsulated version that they would read on Facebook or in the newspaper.
Right.
And I thought I would like to put these interviews. I'd like to record them, if for no other reason than just to preserve them, to say that I interviewed these great people.
It's a lot of fun, as you're discovering, everybody's got an interesting story. There's many great stories out there. So I love those story wagons or whatever they're called that go around the country and give people an opportunity to record their grandfathers and their loved ones and do sort of audio scrapbooks, if you will. And a lot of those end up in the Library of Congress for special purposes. And it's fascinating. Everybody's got a good tale to tell.
Yep. When I had my publishing company, my slogan was, "Everybody has a story. Let us help you tell yours." And,
there you go.
And really and truly, everybody has a story of interest.
Sure.
No matter what level you're coming from. And
that's right.
And the way you have conducted your duties at the radio station inspired me to want to do my podcast. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. I enjoyed having you on, and your dad as well. That was a lot of fun.
And that's another reason why we're talking today on that very special day, which was very special to me when my dad and I were on your show. You asked me what my favorite book was or favorite piece of literature, and I said A Christmas Carol. And as it happened, that was one of yours as well. So,
well, it's a profound piece of work, but of course, I could really go down the rabbit hole about Charles Dickens. But what I love about Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol and his other work is the philosophy that he puts in the voices of his characters. And it's just interesting that someone writing in the 1840s, and other writers, not just Charles Dickens, but since we're talking about Charles Dickens, but someone writing back then could encapsulate human nature so well. And as we know in 2022 and looking back to the 1840s and beyond, human nature doesn't really change.
No.
And so you look back at older writers and they think, boy, they can really see into the future. Well, they're just seeing into the human soul and expressing it very well in the lives of these sort of larger than life, as Dickens does, characters. It's kind of fascinating.
Well, and that particular story is as much a part of Christmas as anything.
Yeah, well, it's like a movie that came out, The Man Who Invented Christmas, which was kind of a neat way of sort of reiterating your point that a lot of the things that traditions and stuff that we celebrate now could harken back to some of the things that Dickens was writing about in his story, and he elevated those. I mean, especially for those of us in the United States. And then when Dickens came over and toured the United States, of course, people ate him up, and we've been doing some of the things that the Cratchits do, for instance, at their table, and that the plum pudding. I mean, those are English traditions, and then there's older European traditions. But Dickens kind of brought them to the attention of readers, over here, and popularized sort of the secular, and in a way, a lot of the secular traditions of Christmas.
And as you said, The Man Who Invented Christmas, the great film starring Dan Stevens as Dickens, who people know from things like Downton Abbey, came from a wonderful book written by Les Standiford on how Dickens was the one who really created, through that wonderful story, the Christmas that we know today. Because, as I said, you don't see many other stories, if any, that are as much a part of holiday traditions now as that story. I mean, everybody knows. Yeah. Everybody knows Ebenezer Scrooge. You use the term Scrooge to describe a tightwad. It's as much part of our culture as it was for the English people and around the world. But
it's amazing, because right after A Christmas Carol, he came out with two other books, The Chimes and The Cricket on the Hearth. Mm-hmm. Both of those, well, neither of those did nearly as well in sales in England and anywhere else in the world as did The Christmas Carol. So, The Christmas Carol, he had a home run on that. He hit a home run on that one.
I've heard it said that next to the Bible, it is the biggest selling book of all time. I don't know if that's true. However, it was selling thousands and tens of thousands of copies before they had ways of tallying how many books were sold. So there's no way to know exactly how many copies of that story have
Can you imagine having
sold.
An original copy of it as it came out? I guess it originally came out in the serial paper, if you will. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine having an original copy of that with the original illustrations? You'd probably have something pretty valuable.
It would be something that I would treasure very deeply. My mother is, I can thank my mother for getting me interested in A Christmas Carol. I got interested in it as a kindergartner because my hero was, and still is in a way, Mickey Mouse. And the Mickey Mouse version started me interested in all other versions, film versions. And, when I was, 5 or 6 years old and a young reader, some of those English words were very difficult to read when I sat down to read the novel. So I was much older when I actually read the novel cover to cover. And and I realized something, having seen many, many different versions of the films by that point.
Yeah. Well, I'm a film nut in general, and The Christmas Carol, I've got many different versions of it, and some of them, I kind of like, if I could do a Frankenstein's monster, if I could pick the ensemble from one film and put it into another one and keep the Scrooge, and if I could kick the Scrooge out of one and keep the Cratchit. I mean, I absolutely love the films, and one of my favorites, you mentioned the Mickey's Christmas Carol. I love the George C. Scott because I love David. Well, he was great. David Warner as Cratchit was a real intelligent Cratchit. But my favorite ensemble was the 1991 one that I guess TNT did with Patrick Stewart as Scrooge. I didn't care for Patrick Stewart because I couldn't get past Jean-Luc Picard with his bald head. It bothered me. But Richard E. Grant as Bob Cratchit was a beautiful performance. It was a real caring and intelligent Cratchit who kind of suffered in silence, but there was a little look behind his eyes that I've got to do this because I've got to keep this job. But he was a great. The ensemble, Marley's Ghost was great. Mrs. Cratchit, it was a beautiful film, but I couldn't get past Patrick Stewart. As great as he is, but it's a beautiful film. But a lot of people's favorite is 1951 Alastair Sims. That shows up as a lot of people's favorite Christmas Carol. But I don't know what yours is.
That is a lot of people's favorite, and for many, many, many years it was my favorite too, because it takes the liberties of going into the past and going and doing things no one has ever done, like talk about how Scrooge and Marley came into their company because they had enough money to cover up an embezzler, and it actually shows his sister dying in childbirth and the pain that he has, and you understand the resentment he has towards his nephew.
Sure.
And it went in and took liberties in that way that none of the other Christmas carols had ever done.
I was going to say that's probably my favorite transformation of Scrooge, when Alastair Sim wakes up and it's like it was all, he says the spirits did it all in one night, and he does the thing with Mrs. Gilbert.
Gilbert, yeah.
Gilbert, and she's screaming, and he's doing, I must stand on my head, I must stand on my... I mean, it was just an amazing transformation, just joyous, and it's fun to watch. Now, the musical version with Albert
Finney.
That followed, and it was the same production company, same writers and composers and things that did Oliver, and then they followed Oliver with Scrooge in 1970 with Albert Finney, and it's fun to watch, and the music is fun. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's the nicest thing that anyone has ever done. Oh, that's a lot of fun. But Albert Finney just, it was a little bit of a caricature. But what do I know? He's Albert Finney, and I'm not, or he was Albert Finney.
Right, right.
I'm not. So.
and musicals. I'm not that big a fan of the music in A Christmas Carol. I prefer you tell the story, you tell it as accurate as possible. But as you know, everybody knows. Thank you very much. There's a new version on Netflix now of the Albert Finney musical, Scrooge, and
I did not know that.
And
check that out.
And it's animated, and it's with it's modern vamps on some of those songs, and with some new songs as well. And
well, I tell you what, speaking of that, you remember the Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol?
Oh, yes.
Which is, now that's Julie Stein, written by, the music by Julie Stein. Julie Stein was a big Hollywood writer of music. Wrote
for Frank Sinatra,
Oh, yeah, gosh. But some of the music in that little cartoon is amazing. Winter Was Warm, the song that Belle sings. When Scrooge is a boy, I'm All Alone in the World. It's heartbreakingly beautiful. And imagine back in those days, before your time, Zach, when there was only 3 stations, and if the Magoo's Christmas Carol was coming on, everybody in the neighborhood was in front of their TVs and watching that little cartoon. And it influenced me a lot. That little movie.
Yeah, and
I saw it, I guess, when I was 9 years old. It helped set me on my path of singing and interest in theater and things. It still holds up today as a beautiful little film. And
up until very recently, they were showing Mickey's Christmas Carol on CBS. I don't know.
That's right.
I don't know how. Many years ago they stopped that, but that is and I'd said, for many years my favorite was the 1951 with Alastair Sim, but I think as the years have gone on, my favorite is now probably the 1938 version with Reginald Owen and the entire Lockhart family as the Cratchit.
Lassie's mom, or Timmy's mom, June Lockhart, who would become the mother on the old TV show Lassie, was one of the daughters, and of course, like you say, her father and mother were the Mr. and Mrs. Cratchit, and that's a real warm, fun to watch, good old black and white, very smooth film process with Reginald Owen. Reginald Owen was such a big character actor in his day, and it's fun. I watch them all, Zach. I
do too.
And I kind of have a sequence, and I start them, and that's probably the first one I put on, and I kind of go from there. I enjoy that one.
I have them all collected right from the Muppets with Michael Caine. I thought Michael Caine did a great Scrooge. I remember going to see that in theaters, and of course being a big fan of the Muppets, I went with my mother, and and the fact that the Muppets were doing my favorite story, so many happy memories of that.
Of course, and the Jim Carrey one, that one grows on me because it took me a while, but I love. Of course, I was a Polar Express fan. And I love the colors and the richness in the Jim Carrey one, and some of it I don't quite care for, but I don't know. I love the story. I love the story so much, and it's beautiful to watch. And his thing where he goes tuppence to tuppence, and he stretches out his hand.
Right.
He wants to get the he doesn't want to give up the 2 pennies.
And
off dead man's eyes.
I love that they were trying to bring the book to life. I thought they wasted a lot of time with the chasing sequences. When Jacob Marley when Jacob Marley's jaw rips off and he has to I think that puts humor in a place that was in probably the most serious spot in the whole story. I could sit and pick them all apart, piece by piece, but I don't think there is one definitive Christmas Carol. They all honor the book in certain ways, and they all take liberties in certain ways.
That's right, man, and which is a good testament to the book, because the book got such a foundation.
Yes.
Different interpretations.
Yes. Nobody does it completely perfect, which also gives the different versions, their own merits in a way.
That's right.
But Gene Lockhart, who played Bob Cratchit, also played Judge Henry X. Harper on Miracle on 34th Street, another one I watch.
Oh my gosh! When we talk about Christmas movies, we really go down. Let me tell you, I just asked my wife, but we can,
we could get off on some tangents. But I read A Christmas Carol, the book, every year to my daughter and wife. Whether or not my daughter pays attention, someday she will, and someday she'll remember that. But we watch all the movies, and if I have time, I will read Valentine Davies' Miracle on 34th Street, because I actually have a copy of that novel. And another great, if you want to go down the Man Who Invented Christmas route, there is a novel by Samantha Silva called Mr. Dickens and Its Carol, which is a nice and very well-researched novel based on the issues that Dickens went through to write A Christmas Carol.
Fascinating. I have to check that out.
But it mirrors Man Who Invented Christmas before Man Who Invented Christmas came out. And so when we were talking on your show, you pointed out the points of ignorance and want the frightful, the frightful children of mankind that appeared from the Ghost of Christmas Present robe, and he says, this boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all, beware the boy. And is that not
no truer statement?
No
truer statements ever been made, because we can see that, I think, in the world today.
I was going to say, is that not so much a part of human fault today?
Yeah, and that's why, like, when I said a while back in our interview here about Dickens putting his philosophy and his observations in the voices of his characters, and that's interesting. The girl is want, the boy is ignorance. Fear them both. It's the ignorance, fear that more, because you can take care of want, if you will. You can be charitable. You can feed people. You can take care of people. You can help people. But ignorance, and I think what Dickens was getting at, ignorance is a little on the woeful side. It's like people sometimes kind of choose to be ignorant. They don't want to know.
Yeah.
They don't want to be objective about things. They're just sort of ignorant about. It's really a big moment in the book that you can really unpack it, but there's so much truth in it, like you say.
Well, it goes back to the two gentlemen who stop at his workplace in the beginning of the book, and who are trying to raise some money for the poor, and he says, it's not my business. So if I'm ignorant of it, check me out of the whole thing. And then he finds that his greatest sin is being intentionally removed from the needs of society and other people.
That's right.
And had he not had that haunting, he never would have realized that, yes, it does matter whether you pay attention to other people's business or not.
That's right. We need to pay attention and
and when he says that most despicable line, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Right. That principle, it was sort of a Malthusian principle, a guy who was in Parliament at the time, that believed that anybody that was badly off just needed to be removed from population.
Right. Yeah. It's their fault.
Yeah, I am that surplus population. Were it not for parents who raised me and said, yes, you can, and yes, you will, and a wife who takes care of me and keeps me in good enough condition that I can go out and contribute to society, society itself would be just as satisfied to put me away in an institution and leave me to rot. I have to work twice as hard sometimes I feel to be that example. And even on days when I think, is it really worth this? But it is, and A Christmas Carol is a story that reminds me that I must, keep myself above that line of the surplus population.
Yeah, that is so true. And if all of us would stop taking so much of what happens to us for granted and taking other people for granted, and kind of woke up a little bit like Scrooge does at the end, we would. The veil would be lifted. We would understand so much more than we tend to. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and I often wonder, if I were to have Cooley's Christmas Carol, for example, and I had some ghostly visitations from the past, present, and future. Scrooge, being that fictional character, was given an amazing gift, and if we all had that gift, i.e. George Bailey, we all feel, George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life, we all feel, sometimes the world would be a better place if we weren't born. So if we weren't born, what would the world look like? you know, to have the opportunity to have to see the world and to see the contributions that we make, what would we take away from that? So I have about eaten up all of our time, but I would like to ask you though still, what you know, and obviously you've read the book and you know the differentiations from all the films. Somebody, if there is anybody out there that's new to Christmas Carol, what is most imperative that they take away from the book, and what is an essential film to start them out?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh, that's a tough one. Well, like I say, my favorite ensemble, which I think in a way encapsulates, you know, some films go just beyond the book in scope. I mean, the little book is great. And the film, like you mentioned, the Alistair Sim one, where they do the backstory of how Scrooge and Marley got into business and how they, you know, took advantage of a crook and all that kind of stuff. That really fleshes out stuff way beyond what's in the book. But I would say that my two favorite films is the Alistair Sim, and for the one that's joyous in its depiction of how we all need each other and the ensemble, the actors, and how everybody comes together, is the 1999 Patrick Stewart one. It's just those are kind of the two go-tos. It's hard to pick one go-to, but those would be for me, those are the two go-tos.
I'm not a Star Trek fan, so I can remove myself and say that Patrick did a good job as Scrooge. It's a little, you know, it's not one that I would want to watch with my 8-year-old daughter. It's a little more macabre because, you know,
it is.
Scrooge sees his own dead body as he's falling down, and you know, in the in the musical Albert Finney, he does go into hell and gets into the ice cold office with the
Alec Guinness
with the effeminate Marley guiding him to his, you know, I found that one interesting when I was younger, but the older I am, the little more irritated I get with that one.
Okay, so if you're forcing me for one, I would say the 1951 Alistair Sim.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Because that holds up over time and does the best all around.
That is most people's favorite, and but for me, you know, overall, I got to go with the 38 with, I think, the Lockhart family and Reginald Owen. I just think that's very hard to beat. But if you're going to find one that's completely true to the book, George C. Scott is the only one that goes into Belle's family, and you see that Belle married and had a family, and he ran into Scrooge in his office alone as Marley is about to die. That's the only one that goes into that part of it. But I mean, you don't have any that's completely true.
Right, that's right.
And maybe one day I'll stage my own here in Whitfield somewhere, and you know, and we'll have a whole 3-hour thing. As far as theatrical adaptations, though, I love it when the Barter does Christmas Carol. They always do a super job. I try to find a place to go see it in some form of live theater every year. I've struck out this year. I couldn't find anything. But last year, John Hardy, who is a Barter director, went and did it at the Lincoln Theater as a one-man show, and that was one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen. Seeing John Hardy do that. David Browning, who is the Mayberry deputy, he does a one-man show, or did a one-man show. I don't know if he still does. He may be retired now. I never got to see him, but I've only seen that one-man show interpreted once with John Hardy, who is now directing It's a Wonderful Life, that's playing now at Barter. And he was absolutely brilliant. That was one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen.
He's probably the right age for it to play young and old
to do the whole to do the whole thing at once. But I have enjoyed this talk tremendously. Thank you for being a part of it.
Oh, sure, my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
And I'm very honored to have you on the show for what your work has meant to me and continues to inspire me. And thank you for being that. And
oh well, you're too kind. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate everything that you do for the community and your writing and participation in things. And it's been quite an honor and a pleasure to speak with you as well. I've had a great time, and Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Merry Christmas to you, and God bless us everyone, right?
That's right. Take care.
Thank you so much, and my best to your family.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yes, sir.